Well, hello, Stacey Murphy here with a quick video on harvesting herbs and flowers. So how do we keep them fresh? How do we make our food delicious? How do we make bouquets? And is water a friend or foe with these herbs when you harvest them? So in this video, I'm going to share with you 3 different types of crops. I group them into categories because each one of these categories is harvested very similarly. And these are categories that I have made up. So you won't find these categories elsewhere. So the first category is what I call mound crops. And these are things that have their outer growth is like an outer ring and their new growth is an inner ring. And so they kind of start to form mounds, which is why I call them mounds. And in this group are things like parsley, cilantro, celery, fennel, chives, dill, and thyme. And so when you're harvesting these types of crops, all you need to do is take the whole plant, pick it up vertically, and what you'll find is there is a gap between the inner growth, which is the new growth, and the older growth at the top. And you can just take your scissors, make one cut, and in your hand will be all of the old growth, which is what you're going to harvest and enjoy, and all the new growth is ready to grow in behind it. So that's as simple as it gets with these crops. And when you'll notice with parsley as an example, that when you don't harvest parsley for a while, it starts to lay down sideways, and you can kind of see the new growth in the center and the old growth all around it. So that's an example of one of the mound crops. And these are also called cut and come again crops. You could, in theory, cut the whole plant down almost in the case of this like celery crop here on the right, and it's going to grow back. Sometimes when you do that, you only get 50% regrowth. With these herbs, oftentimes when you cut them, they keep coming back again and again for most of the season. So you'll find that you really only have to plant them once a season, maybe twice a season, and they'll keep coming back. The second type of crop is what I would call a doubling crop, and basil is the main one here, but sage, rosemary, and lavender work in very similar ways. And the doubling, what I mean by that is the place where you cut the crop, it will double the yield after that. So here you see a basil plant, and what I'm going to call a node is where there is a stem and then there are leaves coming out sideways, and then at the intersection between the stem and the leaf is a new growth, and that turns into 2 new stems. And so basically when you cut just above that node, those little new stems are going to grow into 2 new stems, and so you've basically doubled your yield. So that is the correct way to cut basil, is to cut the stem so that it doubles. And there are multiple crops that work this way. With your sage plants, with your rosemary, with your lavender plants, once they're large, all you really need to do is grab them anywhere and cut them a couple inches above the ground. But if they are new plants and they're small, you want to gently work into them. And so with a small plant like this sage plant, I'm going to make one simple cut and it will double, and I'll wait for that to grow out before I start to trim more off the plant. Okay, so the third type of herb crop is a runner crop, and these are things that sometimes people consider as weeds because they grow very rapidly and they spread out. They grow by root zones, and basically the root spreads sideways, and then anywhere along that root you'll see something sprout up above ground. Mint is famous for this, and this is why a lot of people plant their mint only in containers. So mint, oregano, and marjoram all work this way. And I personally will put them into my vegetable beds, and mint is the one that grows the fastest, so I'll use that as an example. So with my mint, what I will do is I will cut it all the way down to the earth, and I know it's going to sprout back up. I may even, if it starts to outgrow the area and it gets too big, I'll just pull that root system out and I know it'll sprout up somewhere else. Now with my oregano, it doesn't spread quite as quickly, and so basically what I do is I just find the longest tendrils of the oregano and cut those off and use them. Okay, so with these 3 different types of crops, runner crops, mound crops, and doubling crops, which ones when you're harvesting do you want to rinse with water, and which ones do you want to keep dry? So water can be a friend or a foe with these herbs. So the herbs that you really want to keep dry are sage, rosemary, thyme, oregano. These are all things that want to stay dry, and I even like to keep my basil dry. And basil is particularly finicky for cold temperatures, and so I don't want to keep my basil in the fridge. I want to keep it out on the table as a bouquet. And so any of the ones that have water as a friend, you can put those into bouquets on your table, and those are things that you can keep around, things like dill and cilantro. Put them on your table. You can also do that with your sage and your oregano and your thyme and all of those as well, but you just want to make sure that you keep the leaves dry for those. Okay, so when you're growing your herbs, consider the plant's point of view. At some point it wants to reproduce, it's going to flower on you, and that's fine. The flowers can still be pretty. You can bring them in as bouquets. They're still somewhat fragrant and flavorful. You can use them as herbs. When things do flower, oftentimes you have to trim them way back for them to continue to reproduce for you. Flowering onion is still very tasty, like a flowering chive, so you want to make sure you cut this and eat this. And some of the things that flower will grow back, and these are things like dill, sage, basil, thyme, and rosemary. So if your crops flower, don't worry, just cut them, trim them off, eat them, and they will start to grow back. Now, speaking of flowers, there are some gardens that can be really helpful in your garden. They do 4 things essentially. So if you want to add some flowers, they introduce beneficial insect habitat into your garden. They provide pollinator habitat if you're going to grow things that need bees and things like that later. They can be edible and they can be fragrant, and they can also be beautiful, of course. So here are some examples of flowers that you can put in your garden. So the first is calendula, and the petals are edible, so you can add these to your salad, and I would recommend pulling the petals off of the flower and sprinkling them on your salad. Calendula is also medicinal, and then you can make bouquets from them as well. Sunflowers are beautiful. They can add a lot of height to your garden. The seeds are edible. It takes a long time to get there, but they are edible. And sunflowers make beautiful bouquets. I would recommend getting a type of sunflower that branches versus having a single stem, so that you get lots of flowers from one plant. The third flower that's great in a garden is nasturtium. The whole entire plant is edible, the flowers and the leaves. It's very peppery. It's really great in salads. Lavender, of course, is another beautiful flower. Some people consider it an herb. It's fragrant. It can be added to bouquets. Marigolds are a good choice for gardens, and the petals are edible for certain types of marigolds. Lemon gem is one of those, and so if that's a variety that's available to you, then you can eat the petals, add them to your flowers. Borage is really good for insect repel. All of these have insect repellent or beneficial insect properties. For borage, it's kind of an otherworldly looking plant. You eat just the blue part of the flower, and you can put that on your salads. Zinnias are a fabulous flower to have around. They're great for bouquets, and the petals are also edible. Chamomile is another one that is medicinal, and then the flowers are great for bouquets. And so when you're making your flower bouquets, similar to your harvest bouquets for your greens, you have the same rules of the 3 cleans. So clean cuts for the stems. You want to make sure that water can easily go up into the stem. You want clean stems, so you don't want any kind of leaves in the water, because that's how bacteria builds up in the water and that degrades the flower more quickly. And then you want clean water, so you want to refresh that water. Sometimes it's once a week, sometimes it's once every couple days. Just take a look and see if your water is turning cloudy, and that's the time to refresh that water. Or if the stems are not all the way down in the water, you want to refresh the water. So all of those flowers that were edible, you can basically pile them up on a salad and make your food very beautiful. All right, that's it for this video. I'll see you on the next.